Hi, it's Charlie Zeiss with Stargate Pyramids and the Pyramid Science Foundation. Today we're going to be exploring 76345 and universal phi scaling in Eastern religious architecture. This is part three of a video series that I'm doing uh, based upon my book, 76.345, Exploring the Hidden Secrets of the Golden Ratio. Um, this book is available on Amazon.com in both Kindle and paperback editions. So let's get started. By way of review, I'd like to start off and discuss just briefly what we discussed in parts one and two. And again, for those of you who are interested in seeing this information, you can go to uh, YouTube, to the Pyramid Science Foundation YouTube page, and you'll find those prior episodes there. But to briefly summarize, this is important contextual information for those of you who did not see it. What is universal phi scaling and how did we arrive at it? So, Lisa Richards, my partner, and I make Stargate pyramids, capstones, apex amplifiers, caduceus coils, and other accessories, all based upon this universal phi scaling geometry of 76345. But when we first got started, neither one of us knew really what this geometry was. This geometry was never disclosed in the West, and I believe it was done on that it was suppressed on purpose, uh, given the absolutely essential nature of this information. But in order to figure out what it was, we needed, or to build pyramids, we needed to know what the geometry was. So, first thing I did was to measure pictures of the Russian pyramids built in Russia, and this was about as good a head-on photograph as I could find. If you look in the top left-hand corner of the picture on the right, it looks like this picture was actually taken on a glider, which is kind of interesting. But what we did was we measured and found that the geometry was very, very close to 76,345. The you actually can't measure that precisely with a protractor app, but we had a very good idea of that within a hundredth of a degree or so that this was the right geometry. So one of the ideas that I proposed, and this theory came really from the quadrivium. That's an ancient theory or work that Plato discussed with his advanced students, showing how geometry, mathematics, and harmonics all are used in nature to make our creative experience, whether it's from the subatomic up to the galactic. So anyway, using those ideas, I decided to start with the idea of a sphere. That's a three-dimensional version of the two-dimensional circle that I have here, but the results are exactly the same. I decided, in this case, in two dimensions, because it's easier to graph, I took a circle with a diameter of 1, and I started stacking circles on top of it. In each one of those circles, the diameter is the previous diameter divided by phi, phi, or 1.618. So we get 0.618 in the second, 0.382, I believe it is, and 0.236 as our resultant, and it keeps going on forever. But I stacked those circles up, drew the lines on the side to make a triangle in two dimensions, pyramid in three, and I came up with, sure enough, a geometry of 76.345 degrees, which told me that I had nailed this geometry and the way that it had been arrived at, which of course is the geometry of universal phi scaling. Now, the other thing we discussed in part one, very quickly, the Giza pyramid, which most people are more familiar with by far than the Russian pyramid, when you plot them inside each other, if you look at the diagram on the left, you'll see at the bottom right-hand corner the slant angle, which goes from the base up to the top of or the side of the Russian pyramid, is 76.345 degrees. And sure enough, to the third significant digit, the apex angle of the Russian pyramid is exactly the same, namely 76,345. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you visually how that works. If you look at the picture of the Giza pyramid underneath the Russian photograph at the top, I'm going to take that and I'm going to transpose it on as the slant angle at the base of a Russian pyramid. You see that it fits perfectly. So that's how we arrived at the geometry of universal phi scaling. We now know that it's in the Giza pyramid as well, so it must be pretty important. So in part two, I started looking at ancient conical structures that we find throughout the world. I'm just going to go through one example. This is a Nuraghi in Sardinia. There are upwards to 10 to 20,000 of these that are found on this island. They all have this geometry. This geometry also shows up in ancient, what we call forts. I believe personally that they may have been energy transmission or receiving devices of some sort. We find it in ancient Scottish brocks. We also find it in the Great Zimbabwe ruins in Africa. But these specific Nuraghis, under certain methodologies, have been dated back as far as 350,000 years old, which is pretty amazing. But today we're talking about Eastern religious architecture, so we want to start with Hindu temples. Now, after I had originally determined the geometry of the Russian pyramids, one of my viewers from the Netherlands named Patrick Koster wrote me with a picture of some of the temples that Hindu temples that we're going to see in a few minutes. And he suggested that I check them out and see if their geometry matched. And of course they did. And then I began the research of ancient knowledge of sacred geometry, fractals, the Fibonacci sequence. And I found that all of this goes back to ancient India. So this was a very, very important find, and is really the basis upon which this section of the book was written. So there are two major kinds of architectural styles. The older of the two is the Northern Indian style or Nagara style, which is found in North India. And then there's the Southern style, which is called the Dravidian style. And we see pictures of those here. The Nagara and Dravidian styles, you see the Nagara style shows, and we'll see this more, a much more subtle and intricate architectural style. The Southern or Dravidian style is more recent. We'll see here in a minute that the Southern Dravidian being more recent, I wonder whether or not they had lost some of this ancient technology in more recent times, meaning specifically knowledge of fractals, because it's everywhere in the older Nagara style, and I have pyramids here, it should be temples of northern India. So the diagram that I'm showing here shows the fractal nature of the construction involved with the Nagara style pyramids. But suffice it to say, these pyramids show a profound advanced understanding of fractals. That shows that the research that I have done, I've been able to correlate this very geometric angle of universal phi scaling with the scaling found in fractals as well. So now let's go forward and see some of these examples. This is a contemporary example. It's called the Neasden Temple. It's a contemporary temple in London, England, and you notice that 76,345 is demonstrated throughout this temple complex, and the fractal nature of this northern Indian Nagara style is shown as well. But now let's go back to some of the more ancient examples of these temples. This is the Bhutteshwar Temple in India. It's one of quite a few that are actually built out into water. You'll see the 76,345 there. And you'll see that this was a complex, as I say, that was built out in the water, looks like from the very outset. Now, here's another example. This is the Vitala Temple in Hampi, India. Again, notice the 76-345 geometry, as well as the fractal nature of the temple itself. This is the Kandarya Mahadeva Temple in India. It has this geometry and also shows the fractality. Here's the Virupaksha Temple in India, showing these same characteristics. The Khajuraho Temple in Madhya Pradesh, India. Sorry if I mispronounced some of these, but here's a drawing of a mausoleum in Lashkar, India, called the Mausoleum of the Scindias. And once again, it shows fractality as well as the geometry of universal phi scaling. Here's the Vitoba Temple in Bandharpur, India. Again, built, looks like on the water, which is characteristic of many of these temples. Here's another example, the Triambakeshwar Temple in Rishikesh, India. Here's the Bridiswarar Temple in Thanjavur, India as well. Has this geometry, and this one almost looks more Dravidian in style, and maybe this was a transitional form of the northern style pyramid. So here's another example, our final example of northern Indian styles. This is the Rataswar Mahadev Mandir in Varanasi, India. You'll notice there's two pictures here. The one on the left at low tide shows that the temple, is on solid ground, whereas the second example, the base of the temple is actually underwater. So more research needs to be done as to why these temples were built in or near water. But I would imagine that it has to do with free energy technology. To move on, we're going to now talk about Dravidian-style temples. Dravidian-style temples, again, are more recent in nature. They were begun construction of these types of temples in about 550 Christian era, CE, and they all look very similar to these temples that I'm showing now. This is the Thiruvannamalai Hindu temple complex, classic example of the Dravidian style. Note that there are a number of temples in this complex. I think there are 6 temples. Some are facing north-south, some are facing east-west. No matter whether you measure the side of the temple, the angle from the front or from the side, and we'll see an example from the side here in a minute, you get the same 76-345 geometry. Now, I think we're going to be talking about this later as well with Nikola Tesla, but Nikola Tesla used this in Wardenclyffe Tower. So I believe that this geometry is very important in the production of energy, and that's important as we get into our very next slide about this Thiruvannamalai temple. One of the great researchers on these temples in India and other parts of Asia is Praveen Mohan. He has a number of excellent videos where he demonstrates his theories that all of these ancient temples were actually initially power plants. And this very Thiruvannamalai temple is the subject of the video that I've taken the thumbnail from one of his videos, where it says ancient Tesla lingam found. This is actually a drawing. If you look at the middle of the page here, this is a drawing on the outside of the Thiruvannamalai temple, which indicates the existence of what he's calling a Tesla coil. He goes on to point out that there is a lingam in the base of this temple complex, and that this Tesla coil is coming up from out of the ground, and it's generating heat energy in this context because the room in which this is housed, this lingam is housed, is very, very hot. The temperatures are year-round are in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the room. So clear energy generation technology to work in that temple. Here's another example in Fiji, the Sri Siva Subramaniya Hindu temple. Here's another one of the Dravidian temple complexes in India. It looks very similar to the Tiruvannamalai in its general construction and layout. This is called the Meenakshi Temple in Madurai, India. Meenakshi is one of the female deities, major deities in the Hindu religion. Here's another example, Chamasdeshwari Temple in Mysore, India. This was a good example. I was able to measure the geometry clearly from the side of this particular temple. And again, it measures with the 76/345 angle of universal phi scaling. Ragaswamy Temple in Sri Rangam, India has this geometry, as do these other examples. Mirakarjuna Temple in Sri Salem, India. Sri Kalasti Temple in India has this geometry. Sri Vinakshwara Swami Vari Temple in Tirupattur, India. Brahmapuraswarar Temple in Tirupattur, India. Now we're going to show, those were all more ancient temples. These are two examples of contemporary Dravidian Hindu temples that have been built in the United States. The first one here is the Hindu temple found in Malibu, California. And the second is the Meenakshi Temple in Houston. There are numerous examples of these contemporary Dravidian Hindu temples in the United States. Every single one of them has conformed to the same basic building principles that were written down. Maybe, I don't know this for a fact, but maybe as far back as the Vedas. But these have been around for a long time, and the Hindu architects have continued to maintain this sacred geometry in their contemporary architecture. Now, what we're going to find out in the next section, part 4, we're going to find out that Western Christianity has done just the opposite. Although we're going to find this in Christian architecture, it has disappeared from Western Christian architecture in the last 100 years with no good explanation as to why that happened. But that's for part 4. Now let's move on to the Buddhist temples. Just a brief description. A Buddhist temple or monastery is the place of worship for Buddhists. They include structures called a vihara, chaitya, stupa, wat, and pagoda in different regions and languages around the world. Temples in Buddhism represent the pure land or pure environment of a Buddha. Traditional Buddhist temples are designed to inspire inner and outer peace. This first example is coming to us from Cambodia, and this is called the Wat Ek Nam Temple in Battambang, Cambodia. Now, this is a particularly important one. We've seen the free energy technology assertions in the Hindu temples, but here's an example that I'm going to show you here on a YouTube video, that this very temple that I just showed you a picture of is a producer of free energy. So we're going to move over to that slide now, and we're going to see this YouTube video. On this YouTube video, we're going to see this producing free energy. So moving on, we're going to now see some more examples of this geometry in temples, Buddhist temples throughout Southeast Asia. Here's some examples in Cambodia. This is the Wat Nam temple in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Familiar to those of us who lived through the era of the Vietnam War. So Phnom Penh. Here's another example. This is the Five Pagoda temple in Beijing, China. Again, the 76-345 geometry with the balls and the other Antiquitech examples showing up at the top of the temple. Here's an example of the Taiyuan temple in Mount Wutai, China, with this geometry. This is the Mahabodhi Buddhist temple in Bodh Gaya, India. For those of you who have heard of the Bodhi tree, this is where it comes from. This particular temple shows the 76-345 geometry, not only in its slant angle at the base, but also in what I believe is the energetic transmitter receiver that's located at the top. Now here we start some examples of bell-shaped and conical base structures that have this same kind of transmission or receiving technology built into the top of the temples. So this one is the Vishnu Shanti Temple in Delhi, India. Here's a similar temple to Vishnu Shanti in Rajgir, India. They're almost carbon copies of each other. Here is some Buddhist temples in Myanmar. This particular city is called Bagan. Up until recently, it was called Pagan, and it was actually the origin of the term pagan, which of course we know to be non-Christian or non-religious, but it may not have been Christian, but you can see that there are temples everywhere. So this must have been a highly evolved civilization and a highly spiritual one as well. And you can see that this main temple seems to be using that 76-345 geometry as well. Here's some more examples. This is the Miraswati Stupa in Andhapura, Sri Lanka. Same basic structure, the triangular 76-345 at the top and the hemispherical area at the bottom. Now this one is again from Sri Lanka, Udayagiri Rajamaha Vihara Temple in Ampara, Sri Lanka. The base seems to be more bell-shaped, but the same basic structural idea. Again, a more bell-shaped one inside of a cave in Sri Lanka, the Nambula Buddhist Cave Temple there in Sri Lanka. Here's a Dimatamal Viharaya temple in Sri Lanka. Again, you see the same basic structural components at play. Here's the Kiri Vihara Stupa in Sri Lanka that has this technology. The Lankarama Stupa in Sri Lanka. The Malagenta Rahamaha Vihara in Sri Lanka as well. The Mirasawetiya Stupa in Anuradhapura, Sri Lanka. The Ranka Vihara Stupa in Sri Lanka. And the Somawatiya Chaita Stupa in Sri Lanka. The Thurapamaya Stupa. And now we're moving on into Thailand. Here we see the Wat Chet Yat in Thailand, has this geometry. Here's Wat Mahayang in Thailand, has it as well. Again, the same characteristic 76-345 top piece. Now here's an interesting, more contemporary structure. It's the Wat Ni Wat Thamaprat. You can see that it looks just like some of the Gothic and Neo-Gothic churches and cathedrals we'll be talking about in part 4. but here it is located in Thailand and used as a Buddhist temple. Here's the Wat Phra Sorn Khao in Thailand, a beautiful facility nestled in the mountains. Here's another one in China, the Wat Phra Pathom Chedi in Thailand. Notice it looks more like a bell, traditional bell at the base. Here's an example of another type of structure, the Wat Phra Pathom Chedi in Thailand as well. So to finish up, we're going to look at Buddhist pagodas in various parts of Asia. Here is the Great Wild Goose Pagoda in China, has the 76-345 geometry. Here's the Saisho and Hirosaki Pagoda in Aomori, Japan, has this geometry. The Temple Ji in Osaka, Japan has it. And finally, the Thien Mu Pagoda in Hue, Vietnam. Again, Hue harkens back to the Vietnam War. I'm grateful that this did not get destroyed during that war. So one other example I did not put into this series, but there is a pagoda at Disney World in Orlando, Florida, that all is a copy, I believe, of Temple Ji. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I believe that's the one. And it also has mimicked that 76-345 geometry. So, that's going to conclude it for today. You can see this geometry was known thousands of years ago, was used throughout Asia and India in all of the religious temples. But the bigger question remains, were these temples, many of these temples used as energy devices, free energy generating devices as well in the past? So more research to be done in that regard. To finish up, for those of you interested in ordering pyramids from Lisa and me, please go to stargatepyramids.com and you'll be able to order there. We've got pictures here of our pyramids, our capstones, caduceus coils, apex amplifiers, and there are other products available for you at stargatepyramids.com. Use our special coupon to get 30% off. That coupon code is NOPayPal30. We stopped using PayPal about 6 weeks ago after they put in some obnoxious statements that they could take $2,500 as part of your service agreement, that you would allow them to take $2,500 out of your account if they didn't like your politics. And they have been known to censor as well. They've been censoring many voices on the left and the right, so we no longer use them. But we're using No PayPal 30 to alert you that you don't want to be using PayPal going forward if you value freedom of speech. So we thank you for watching, and as always, we wish you the best. I wanted to show you this as well. Yes, Namaste also has the geometry of universal phi scaling. I thank you all for watching, and you have a great day.